Hey everybody, welcome to Sunday night. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about the Led Zeppelin albums, and I just happen to have all the vinyl Led Zeppelin albums. It's kind of, relatively speaking, some of the pearls in my collection, and I have an entire set. So I'm kind of showing off the collection of vinyl Led Zeppelin albums, and I'm also going to give my ranking of the 9 Led Zeppelin albums. I hope I've got those numbers right, but I hope you'll watch. Well, everybody, I'm going to try to rank the Led Zeppelin albums, and I've got, like I said, I've got all the vinyl records here, and I think there are 9, so I'm going to try to rank them. By the way, before I get started, I hope you'll consider watching my See the Light album release, if you will, long play video, which I did to a dash cam drive from Monticello to Covington, Georgia. And you can watch it all the way through, and the songs are also time-stamped. If you want to hear one of the songs, you can go to the timestamps in the description. But I hope you'll watch that. That was kind of a big deal to put that out there. But I wanted to do a ranking of the Led Zeppelin albums. I think that's sort of an interesting thing to do. Very daunting because, of course, particularly when you get into that string of great albums they did, trying to put one over the other is a fool's errand, quite frankly, because the minute you think, well, that was a good one, then there's something about the other album that you might like, and you end up kind of uncertain, which tells you how great they all are. But I did rank them, and it's kind of interesting. I just preface my comments a little bit. I'm old enough to remember when Led Zeppelin was not as popular as they are now. I think in a weird way, they're one of the bands that have become more popular over time because they were a counterculture band back when I was listening to them in the 70s. And if you're my age or older, you probably remember that too. I bet half our high school didn't really know who Led Zeppelin was. They were into disco or some of the pop stuff. But over the years, the excellence of their music has really gained traction, and I think they've kind of transcended the countercultural aura that they used to have, and today they're just obviously, I think, some of the great music of the 20th century, and I'm not saying that lightly. Unfortunately, I never got to see Zeppelin. Just a little story. In 1977, I had a ticket to go with 3 other guys to see them at the Pontiac Silverdome. You can Google that, whatever tour that was in 1977. I'm pretty sure it was in April. And I was going to go see them, and the concert, I think, was Saturday night, and Friday night, my dad decided that he didn't want me to go. He had a very nice fatherly talk with me and just said, son, I'm not going to let you go to that concert. And I was so disappointed, and I love my dad so much, and I think he was he thought that was a good decision, and maybe some ways as a father it was a good decision. But anyway, I grew up and got older never having seen Led Zeppelin, and then I was going to go see them in 1980, and John Bonham died, so I got my money back. By the way, I think it was like $10. I was going to go see Led Zeppelin, and maybe it was 15, but I mean, it wasn't much money. It doesn't sound. But I had sent in the money, and but then they refunded my money when John Bonham died. So I never did get to see them. I did see Robert Plant in the late '80s, and I saw him on that tour where he was kind of reconnecting a little bit with some of his Led Zeppelin stuff, for quite a few years in the earlier part of the '80s. He was kind of like some of these typecast actors. He tried to avoid doing anything that reminded people of Led Zeppelin, it seemed like. But I saw him on the tour where he had a pretty good rock band and did some Led Zeppelin type stuff. So I did see Plant, but I never got to see Led Zeppelin. But I'm going to rank these albums here. I've got them all. Some of them are in a sleeve, so... but we'll start out with what is sort of I'm not including this in the ranking. I think there are 10 albums here I've got, and 9 of them I'm ranking. But this would be one I just wanted to mention, which is The Song Remains the Same. And that's, of course, the great live album, The Song Remains the Same, accompanied by a movie. I saw that movie the night it came out, and there was no one in that theater. Maybe a couple people scattered around, but there was almost no one in that theater. And I remember it was pretty good. One thing I will say about this album is you have to remember back then, hearing Led Zeppelin live was really rare. They didn't have any YouTube, and you had these great studio albums, and there wasn't a lot of tab even around then. So even how he played, if you were into guitar, how he played a lot of that stuff was so mysterious. And there was very little Led Zeppelin live. So today on YouTube, you can, there's so much old live Led Zeppelin footage out there you can see within seconds. It wasn't like that then. So this was a really special thing. I don't know if it's the best example of Led Zeppelin live that there ever has been. Some of there's other footage of them that play great. I think it's really good though. Some of the late '60s, early '70s stuff is super good. This is great. Some of the later '70s stuff, I think they were looked like they'd been at it a while. Maybe some of the last 1979-ish. Period performances, but this kind of came out right in the middle of Led Zeppelin's heyday, and if you have to remember the movie and the album, how rare seeing Led Zeppelin live was back then. Now I remember my friend had a bootleg album. He'd actually, it's just like he had bought this bootleg album in the back room of some old indie record store, and it kind of came in a homemade cardboard cover with a kind of unauthorized looking fuzzy photo on it. And, you could tell it wasn't a commercial product, but in a way and it was a bad recording. It wasn't a great, I don't think it was the best night they ever played, and it was recorded poorly, but in a way it was cooler than everything else just because you got to hear them live and there was such authenticity to it. I'm not advocating bootlegging, but this album was really cool at the time because it was all you had. So hats off to one of the great live albums, I would say. Okay, let's go down the list here. Coming in at number 9 is Led Zeppelin Coda. I imagine not everyone will agree on all the album rankings that we've got coming up, but I imagine a large percentage of you might have put Coda last. Some people wouldn't have even included it on the list since it was kind of a epitaph or some odds and sods that they kind of put out after they really weren't playing anymore. But it was never played all that much. The one thing I will say about it, I remember listening to this album with my friend around the time it came out, and now this would be in the early 80s, and I didn't have the discernment of music that I have now. I don't know if I have discernment, but if I do now, I have more of it now than I did then. But I could tell it was kind of outtakes and things. I remember listening to the guitar solo on, was it I Can't Quit You, Baby? And I could kind of tell he was kind of running scales, and it sounded, and I could just tell it wasn't up to the excellence in terms of feel. Jimmy Page has never been a perfect guitar player. I think he said he often leaves in mistakes, but the feel and the imagination was always the priority. And I remember even back then thinking that this album wasn't really up to the standards of the other ones. Like I said, some people might not have even included it in this list, but I put it last at number 9. At number 8, I put Led Zeppelin In Through the Outdoor. It's a good album. Certainly was a popular album. You know, if you think about it, some of their most famous songs come off that album. Fool in the Rain, In the Evening, All My Love. There were a couple others, too. I think Page was having some personal issues, and it's more of a John Paul Jones album. Now, there's nothing wrong. John Paul Jones is great, obviously, 100% respect. But Led Zeppelin was a guitar band, if you think about it. And so I think it lost some in that period. Some of the songs didn't really, rise to the awesomeness of some of the other tracks. And I think even Page has been quoted as saying it was a direction that he wouldn't have wanted the band to continue in should they have continued on. But the one thing I'll add about that album is In Through the Outdoor. Just a second. On In Through the Outdoor, we've got an Amazon Prime truck coming. On In Through the Outdoor was In the Evening, is I think my favorite song on that album. But it wasn't always, because I think partially of the way it was recorded. You can just set it there. Do I need to sign anything or?
No.
Set it there, thanks. But the way it was recorded or something. But if you ever see In the Evening live, and they didn't play that much live after In Through the Outdoor came out, but they did. I think there's some footage of him doing it live, and it's a rocker. It's a good old Led Zeppelin rocker, In the Evening, and I'm not sure that the studio version conveys that as much as some of the live versions. I also think that's a song that Jimmy Page often used a Strat on. He's not associated with the Strat. But I put, this is number 8. I also don't like the album covers. I think they have that kind of Formula Rock album cover look. If you watch that video I did, 1968 to 1973, I talk about Formula Rock and how, among other things, it changed album covers. These have that kind of late 70s Formula Rock album cover look. Not that the cover is more important than the music, but that was 8. Number 7, I imagine some of you won't agree with this. I put Presence. Now, I love Presence. I remember when this came out. I was like 14 or 15 when this came out, and it got. I didn't know that much about music then, but I was into Led Zeppelin at the time for a 14-year-old. But I did read some reviews of it, including in Cream. I don't know if anyone, the CREEM, and some of those old Rock and Roll Circus, those types of things. I used to read those magazines. Wish we had those now. And it kind of got mixed reviews. But I think they did it kind of quickly. But I think this might be one of the albums Jimmy Page says he's proudest of. I think they did it pretty quickly under some duress. I think Plant was going through personal challenges with his son, right? So. And I think Achilles' Last Stand over the years has emerged as really one of Page's masterpieces. You heard a good bit back when I was a kid, but I think it's kind of risen above like a lot of really great music does over the years. And now I think it's usually listed as one of Page's guitar tour de forces among the many. But I don't know. It had to go somewhere. What are we on? 7. So some of you might have ranked this higher. I think some people might say this is their favorite album. It's got another kind of Formula Rock album cover. I like the old school hippie counterculture album covers. But anyway, there we go. Number 6. I know some people won't agree with me on this, but I put Led Zeppelin 3. Now, Led Zeppelin 3 is a great album, so we're not saying any of these albums are bad. We had to rank them somewhere. Led Zeppelin 3 is famous for the acoustic stuff on it, which is just wonderful. But, they've got some great acoustic stuff on other Zeppelin albums. Led Zeppelin 4 has got some really beautiful acoustic stuff. particularly Battle of Evermore, obviously, and Going to California. I hope you watch my little tribute to Going to California. It's somewhere on here. That was doing a multi-screen video was a big breakthrough for me in my technological incompetence. I did 2 guitars and played Going to California, and kind of turned out pretty good. I hope you watch it. But they've got good acoustic stuff on other albums, so I'm not going to prioritize it just because it's got good acoustic stuff on it, because Led Zeppelin, was an acoustic band. It's definitely got some really great acoustic stuff on it, like Thank You, but a couple of the really great songs on here, of course, are the Immigrant Song, Celebration Day, which is a super good song, and Since I've Been Loving You. Now, Since I've Been Loving You is one of the best songs I think Led Zeppelin ever did, and it's a great example of Jimmy Page and the whole band, but Jimmy Page in particular is such a good blues guitarist, because he takes they wrote that song, and they take it's kind of a traditional blues song, but it's not just a conventional blues song. It's got that ba 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 ba. It's so well written, and the feel of it is so great. And you can see it on the movie. The Song Remains the Same. It's such good guitar playing. I think it might be one of the best solos he ever played. If you look at Since I've Been Loving You on that movie. So this is, what are we on? Number 6. I hope I get the numbers right. Number 5. Now I know people are going to start disagreeing with me rapidly here, but what the hell? We got to put them somewhere, folks. Led Zeppelin 2. Great album. I love it. It's only number 5 because there's some other great ones coming up. You know what? I think the audio quality, I wouldn't say is as good. It's not as good a sounding record. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if that's true. Heartbreaker, Ramble On, I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But Livin', Lovin', Made, there's some great songs on here. Bring It All Home. It's one of the great number 2 albums ever. You had one of the greatest debut albums of rock and roll history, and then you come out with this. It's a pretty good follow-up, and that trips up a lot of good bands, trying to come up with the follow-up. It's a great album, and what are you going to say about it? It's Led Zeppelin 2. I mean, go on. All right, that was number 5. Okay, number 4. This was a tough one. Houses of the Holy. I was going to rank this down a little bit, because one of the things I was trying to think through a little bit, and I've always thought like the grunge, and I'm not a big fan of Dire Maker. I know some people like Dire Maker. By the way, great album cover. Very, I won't say a cult, because I don't like that term. They used to say Jimmy Page worshiped the devil. I don't think that, but it is sort of a pre-Christian, let's put it that way. And that's a rock and roll album cover there. That's not one of those late 70s album covers. But, the grunge, Dire Maker, I always thought those were kind of, I don't want to say filler, but you know what I thought of? Some of the best guitar playing Jimmy Page ever did, in my opinion, is that little duet, The Song Remains the Same, and the Rain Song. The Song Remains the Same is such a well-done song with that 12-string Gibson. He played on it, if that's how he did it in the studio. It's just so good. And Plant, it's a great example of how Plant worked so well with Page. I'm sure Page had written all those guitar parts, and Plant kind of turned it into such a good song. That was such a good songwriting partnership, because otherwise you might have had some kind of weird guitar playing that was kind of cool. And I think Plant's solo career shows that he never really had anyone to bounce off of like Jimmy Page. Or maybe he was too famous after Led Zeppelin. People kissed his ass so much that they didn't really. He wasn't really getting the quality of someone else to work with like he had with Page, where they were sort of co-writers. But that's such good songwriting, and The Song Remains the Same. And, of course, the Rain Song, oh, my God, the Rain Song is an absolute masterpiece. And you watched my little thing on Steve Lukather Criticizes Tab. That's another one of these videos I did a year ago that no one watches. But I tell the story of how in high school I walked over to this guy's house. It was like 2 miles or something, and I didn't even know where I was. I didn't have GPS back then. But I took my guitar, if you can imagine, and I finally got to this guy's house, and we were playing guitar, and he began to wax eloquent to me on the greatness of Led Zeppelin. And he played the Rain song. Now, he played the Rain song in standard tuning, and for 40 years, I thought that's how you played it. And thank goodness for Tab and YouTube. It's a really beautiful song in an unusual tuning. I think it's a Celtic-ish tuning, if it's not something Jimmy Page flat out made up. But such a beautiful, lush guitar part. It's great with the band, but just the guitar part in that is gorgeous. And of course, you've got Dancing Days on here and The Ocean. So obviously, great album. A couple of the tracks I almost wanted to put it higher, and you got No Quarter, great song. Kind of a loose, John Paul Jones came up with a really cool vibe, and everybody played to it. Number 3. Number 3, Led Zeppelin 1. This could have been higher. One of the great first albums ever. And it was that high energy, you just feel the energy of a new band, and they were still young bucks, and oh my gosh, it's a good album. Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, You Shook Me, Dazed and Confused. Come on. Your Time Is Gonna Come, Black Mountain Side, beautiful. Black Mountain Side, I think it's it was a tribute to a guy named Bert Jansch, but it's by Jimmy Page in here. But there was a British folk guitar player, I think his name was Bert Jansch, that was popular when Page and Clapton and all those guys were little. And it's that, I guess in America we call it Travis picking, but it's super good. Communication Breakdown, come on. I Can't Quit You, Baby, how many more times? Boston, I mean, there's some good ones out there, Bad Company, but you try to name a better. You might name some that are as good or close to as good. You try to name a better first album. Let me know. There's some that are up there with it, maybe. You try to name a better first album. Oh, my God. And it sounds great. And, I think it could have been a Yardbirds album almost. And in a way, the breakup of the Yardbirds was fortuitous. Page... I never listened to Yardbirds that much, but I see some of the Page-era Yardbirds footage now on YouTube, and you realize this could have been Zeppelin. They do like Train Kept a Rollin' and, some of that kind of stuff. But so that was number 3. Could have been higher. Number 2, I put Physical Graffiti. I was going to rank Physical Graffiti lower. I kind of went back. I think Physical Graffiti is like Led Zeppelin's White Album, or the band and Bob Dylan and the band, the Basement Tapes. It's kind of sprawling. It includes a lot of stuff you wouldn't have put on a single album, which gives it a kind of loose feel. But then you look at all the tracks: The Rover, Night Flight, Houses of the Holy, of course, Kashmir, 10 Years Gone, Down by the Seaside. Oh my God. It's a freaking great album, and and the other stuff on it that's kind of loose, it gives it that kind of shambles feel in some areas of the album, which some might mark it down for. But I think it's kind of like the Beatles' White Album. It's got all these gems on it, and then some things that maybe wouldn't have ended up on a single album, but you're glad you have them. And I think the more time goes by, this is one of the great albums ever. And of course, the really standout tracks that we always hear, like Kashmir, I mean, are among the best rock songs ever. So, by the way, I've got a picture of me sitting on those steps, probably like a million other people, but I was in New York with another guy. We actually played. There's a little theater right down here. I forget what it was called, but it's right off this building, which is Mark's Place or something. And we played a little duo concert in that theater. And there weren't too many people in there. We don't know too many people in New York City, but we were booked to play in that little theater. And I didn't know it, but at the time I got there and I said, damn, if that isn't the Physical Graffiti building. And that's also the building where the Rolling Stones filmed Waiting on a Friend. So there are probably a couple other associations with that building. So I played basically right under that building in a little theater. But what an awesome album. And like I said, the ones that you don't often hear that maybe would have been cut off a tighter single album make this a more special collection. And I think along with the really main tracks that we always hear on that, you've got some, was it Boogie with Stu? You've got some really cool stuff on here. That little, one of my favorite Led Zeppelin acoustic songs is that Bon Your R. Am I saying that right? Beautiful little acoustic solo by Jimmy Page. You just can't say enough good things about this album. Number one, some people might not have put this number one. I did. No matter how many times you hear it, let's pull this out. Every song on this freaking album, Led Zeppelin 4. I saw, who's that one guy that has that show about rock and roll, metal, I don't know, but anyway. He said that was one of the worst album covers for the best albums ever. I don't know. I kind of like it. I wonder where that is in England, if it's in England or Wales, I don't know. But anyway, look at this. Black Dog, Rock and Roll, The Battle of Evermore, Stairway to Heaven, Misty Mountain Hop, Four Sticks, Going to California, When the Levee Breaks. I'm sorry, everybody. That is, every song on that is a masterpiece. It's got that loose vibe, almost like the live feel, where it's got that kind of on the edge looseness where there's creativity and a little bit of risk, and yet it's all meticulously done, like When the Levee Breaks. They didn't play that song too much live because it's pretty hard to pull off. It is a masterpiece, and the way it's recorded, I guess they were, where the Headley Grange. Some of you can correct me, but they recorded it. A lot of these albums are like this, but the engineers today would have a heart attack because John Bonham's drums are like on everything. Like the engineers, you've got to be able to separate the drums, and the little. We've got to have a little mic for the snare and a little mic for this tom and a little mic for that tom, and we're going to mix them all. And, we can't have any drums on the bass track, and the rhythm guitar, you got to isolate everything. Let me tell you, John Bonham's on everything, except maybe some of the overdubs. But you get a great rock and roll freaking sound, loud, great playing, and it's the performance and the spirit of it that like that first Van Halen album, some of those, that's such a rock and roll thing that there's not a bad song on this album. You can say Four Sticks maybe hasn't been heard as much, but Four Sticks is still one of the great, everybody's heard Four Sticks, and the other ones are all radio classics. Every one of those, you hear them all the time. Black Dog, Rock and Roll, The Battle of Evermore, Stairway to Heaven. You ever heard? Has anyone ever heard Stairway to Heaven? Maybe you have. Misty Mountain Hop. Every one of those songs is a classic. So I thought about it a little bit, and I said, you know what? That Led Zeppelin 4, it's one of those albums you hear so much, it's easy to forget how freaking great an album it is. And I think it's the 50th anniversary of this album, right? So hats off to Led Zeppelin 4. Maybe I'll do another video about it in the near future. But all these albums are good. I think some of the later ones, you could kind of, they didn't really have the magic and the charm of the first string of albums. And you might even say Coda. Well, I'm not going to say they weren't good albums, but it's everything, it's Led Zeppelin, But definitely, that string of great albums they did, they are all great. I put this Led Zeppelin 4 Zoso at number 1, and I think it deserves it. I wonder what Page would say. I think Presence might be his favorite album, but I've heard him talk about Led Zeppelin 4 before, and I could tell it's got a special place in his heart. I mean, 8 songs, every one is just great performance, a great song. There's not a kind of, well, we could have cut that one. Every song on it's just a golden song. And it's got a couple nice acoustic songs on it. It's not all one style. It's got some, good old power rock and roll. It's got that kind of dark blues, like When the Levee Breaks. And it's of got that mystical kind of medieval Stairway to Heaven, that kind of a pagan sounding vibe that Led Zeppelin could come up with sometimes, which is very English, by the way. That's like I think the English folk influence. And English folk guitar is played a little differently. They like when people sit around and play folk guitar in England, I think there's a little different flavor to it than like American folk guitar. And some of that, which I think you hear on Stairway to Heaven, but you also so much Led Zeppelin stuff. And of course, he was so creative; he took it to another level and was very distinct and, in a way, not derivative, and in a way, very derivative. But those are all good albums. But I thought I'd share my ranking. I really would like to hear what you think about it, because there were a couple there I wasn't sure where to put them. They're all well-loved albums by millions, obviously, including moi. Thank you. God bless you. I hope you'll watch my album, See the Light, if you get a chance. And you can find it. It's a dash cam video right now. It's other places too, but I made a little dash cam video. You can just sit and watch it, and it's time-stamped. So if you want to hear one song, just hit a timestamp. God bless you. Hats off to really one of the great bands ever. I don't think we'll ever get to see them again. I don't think. And I never did see them. I told you that story, but no regrets. My dad loved me, and that was his call. And as I'm older now, I respect his fatherly authority. God bless you all. Take care.